The morning sun rose over the city of Nueva Esperanza on the colony world of New Valencia, and 17 million humans began their day without knowing it would be their last. Children walked to school while their parents headed to work in the factories and farms that had turned this once barren planet into a thriving human world. And the sky was clear and beautiful in a way that only colony worlds could be. Humanity had joined the Star Council 43 years ago, and in that time they had spread to dozens of worlds across the galaxy, building new homes and new lives among the stars that their ancestors had once only dreamed about. The older species of the galaxy looked at humanity with a mixture of curiosity and contempt, seeing them as newcomers who had barely learned to walk among the stars. Primitive creatures who had only recently stopped killing each other over patches of dirt on their homeworld. The Vethkai Dominion was the oldest and most powerful of these ancient species, a race of tall reptilian beings who had ruled 3 galactic arms for over 10,000 years and who viewed humanity's rapid expansion with growing anger. High Speaker Kethaner of the Vethkai had warned the Star Council many times that humans were spreading too fast and too far, that they needed to be contained before they became a threat. But the Council had dismissed his concerns as paranoia, so Kethaner decided to handle the human problem himself. The Vethkai battle fleet emerged from slipspace at exactly noon local time. 200 warships appearing in the sky above New Valencia like dark clouds blocking out the sun. And for a moment the people below simply stared upward in confusion. There had been no warning, no declaration of war, no demands or ultimatums. And the humans on the ground had no idea why alien warships were suddenly filling their sky. The first orbital bombardment struck Nueva Esperanza at 12:03 local time. The plasma beams cut through the atmosphere like burning knives, striking the heart of the city and vaporizing everything within a 10-kilometer radius in an instant. And the shockwave flattened buildings for another 50 kilometers in every direction. More beams followed, striking the other major cities of San Miguel and Puerto Nuevo. And within 6 hours, the 3 largest population centers on New Valencia had been reduced to fields of glass and ash. 17 million humans died that day, and the Vethkai fleet departed without a single word of explanation, leaving behind only destruction and grief. The news reached Earth within hours, carried by emergency faster-than-light communications, and the human government received the death toll with a silence that stretched across the entire planet. President Marcus Chun stood in the situation room surrounded by his advisors and military commanders, watching the footage from New Valencia with an expression that revealed nothing of what he was feeling inside. "Get me Ambassador Vasquez," he said quietly, and his voice was steady in a way that made everyone in the room feel cold. The Star Council convened 3 days later in the Great Chamber on the neutral world of Axis Prime, where representatives from over 200 species gathered to discuss matters of galactic importance. Ambassador Elena Vasquez of Earth entered the chamber with her head held high, walking past the delegates of 100 alien species who watched her with expressions ranging from pity to amusement. The Celestin Accord, oldest of all council species, had already called for calm and restraint, and their ambassador Liren spoke at length about the importance of measured responses and diplomatic solutions. High Speaker Kethaner of the Vethkai stood before the assembly with obvious pride, his scaled face showing no remorse as he explained that the attack on New Valencia had been a corrective action against human encroachment into contested space. He produced documents showing that New Valencia had been built on territory claimed by the Vethkai centuries ago. And though everyone in the chamber knew these claims were falsified, no one challenged them. The other species whispered among themselves, some expressing sympathy for humanity, while others agreed that the young species had been expanding too aggressively and needed to be reminded of their place. Ambassador Vasquez listened to all of this in silence, her dark eyes moving slowly across the chamber as she took note of every face, every expression, every whispered comment. When Kethener finished speaking, the chamber fell quiet, and all eyes turned to the human ambassador. Elena Vasquez rose from her seat and walked to the speaking platform, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. And she stood there for a long moment before she spoke. 17 million of my people are dead, she said, and her voice was calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the vast chamber without any need for amplification. 17 million men, women and children who woke up 3 days ago expecting an ordinary day, who had done nothing wrong, who had threatened no one, who simply wanted to live their lives in peace. She paused, looking directly at High Speaker Kethener with eyes that held no fear. We have received your message, she continued, and something in her tone made several of the nearby delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. We understand it perfectly. She turned and began walking toward the exit, and the chamber remained frozen in confused silence as she approached the great doors at the threshold. She stopped and looked back over her shoulder, and when she spoke her final words, they seemed to hang in the air like a promise. You will receive our reply. Then she was gone, and the chamber erupted in confused chatter as the delegates tried to make sense of what had just happened. High Speaker Kethener laughed, a harsh reptilian sound that silenced the nearby delegates, and he turned to Ambassador Leering with obvious amusement. It seems the humans have chosen to retreat rather than face consequences, he said, and his confidence was absolute. The certainty of a predator who had never known defeat. Ambassador Leering did not laugh, and there was something troubled in the ancient Celestine's eyes as they watched the doors through which the human had departed. Perhaps, Leering said quietly, more to themselves than to Kethener, or perhaps we have just witnessed something else entirely. But no one was listening, and the council moved on to other business, dismissing the humans as a defeated species that would soon learn to accept its place in the galactic order. They could not have been more wrong. 3 months passed after the attack on New Valentia, and the galaxy waited for humanity to do something. But the humans remained strangely quiet. Their delegates continued to attend Star Council sessions, sitting in their assigned seats and listening to the proceedings without ever speaking. And their merchant ships continued their usual trading routes as if nothing had happened. The Vethkai watched this silence with growing contempt, interpreting it as proof of human weakness and cowardice. And High Speaker Kethener took every opportunity to mock the defeated species in public forums. The humans have learned their lesson, he declared to the council, his reptilian voice dripping with satisfaction. They understand now that they are not our equals and never will be. Other species nodded in agreement, believing that humanity had accepted its place in the galactic hierarchy, a young and weak species that had been properly disciplined by its betters. Ambassador Leering of the Celestine Accord was not so certain, and the ancient being spent many sleepless nights, wondering about the strange calmness that had settled over human space. But even Leering could not see what was happening in the deep, black between the stars, in the hidden places where no alien sensors could reach, because humanity was not sitting quietly in fear and defeat. Humanity was preparing for war in the Sol system. Every shipyard was running triple shifts, producing warships at a rate that would have seemed impossible to outside observers. And the factories on Mars and Luna were churning out weapons and ammunition around the clock. President Marcus Chen had activated military reserves that the galaxy did not know existed, calling up veterans from conflicts that humanity had fought against itself in the dark years before they reached the stars. These were men and women who had survived the Mars insurrection and the Titan siege. Soldiers who had learned to fight in the vacuum of space against enemies who knew every human trick and weakness. And they were very good at what they did. Admiral Chen Weilin, no relation to the president, had been pulled out of retirement to command the 1st Expeditionary Fleet. And she spent her days reviewing battle plans and her nights remembering the images from New Valentia. The logistics of what humanity was attempting would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy as an example of impossible achievement. Moving 47 million tons of war material across 400 light-years without a single detected transit, human ships traveled through little-used jump points and forgotten routes, maintaining strict communication silence and avoiding all contact with alien vessels. And the pieces of the largest military operation in galactic history slowly moved into position. The civilians on humanity's border worlds were quietly evacuated, transported to inner systems under the guise of routine population transfers. And the worlds they left behind were converted into military staging grounds. All of this happened in silence, invisible to the watching galaxy. And the HFY continued to believe that they had broken humanity's spirit in her office aboard the flagship Victory's Price. Admiral Chun Wei-Lin reviewed the final attack plans with her senior staff, and one of her officers raised a concern that had been troubling him. "Admiral," Captain Rodriguez said carefully, "the battle plan calls for strikes against HFY population centers, and there will be significant civilian casualties." Admiral Chun looked up from the tactical display, her expression unreadable. "I am aware," she said. "Should we perhaps attempt to minimize collateral damage?" Rodriguez continued. "To show that we are better than them, that we do not make war on innocent people." The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was cold. "Pull up the casualty reports from New Valencia," she ordered. And the display shifted to show endless lists of names, photographs of the dead, images of children's bodies in the rubble. 17 million people, Admiral Chun said. 17 million civilians who were given no warning, no chance to evacuate, no opportunity to surrender. She turned to face her staff directly, and there was something in her eyes that made even the bravest officers look away. "Did the HFY try to minimize civilian casualties when they attacked us?" she asked, though it was not really a question. "No, Admiral," Rodriguez answered quietly. "No," Chun repeated. "They did not. And neither will we." She returned her attention to the tactical display, zooming in on the HFY homeworld of Kethanar Prime. "We are going to teach them a lesson," she said. "We are going to make them understand, truly understand, what it means to attack humanity. And if they try to surrender..." Another officer asked. Admiral Chun's expression did not change. "New Valencia did not get the chance to surrender," she said. "The HFY will receive exactly as much mercy as they showed our people." The room was silent, and everyone present understood that they were about to do something that would change the galaxy forever, across human space. Similar conversations were happening on dozens of warships, as commanders and soldiers prepared themselves for what was coming. And while some questioned the morality of what they were about to do, none refused to participate. The HFY had killed 17 million innocent humans, and humanity was about to show the galaxy what happened to those who attacked them on Axis Prime. The Star Council continued its usual business, and High Speaker Kethanar continued to mock humanity at every opportunity, unaware that his death was approaching at faster than light speed. The human fleets reached their final positions on the 92nd day after the New Valencia attack, hidden in the darkness between stars, waiting for the signal that would begin the counterattack. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin sat in her command chair aboard Victory's Price, surrounded by the quiet efficiency of her bridge crew, and she looked at the chronometer, counting down the final minutes. "All fleets report ready," her communications officer announced. The Admiral nodded slowly, thinking of the dead of New Valencia, of the children who would never grow up, of the families that had been erased in an instant of alien cruelty. "Send the signal," she ordered, and her voice was steady as stone. "Begin the attack across 11 star systems." Human warships powered up their weapons and began to move, and the HFY Dominion had only minutes left to exist as a galactic power. The silence was over. Humanity's reply had begun. The human counterattack began at exactly 0347 Galactic Standard Time. And it happened everywhere at once, across 11 HFY star systems. Human warships emerged from hiding and struck with a fury that the galaxy had never witnessed. And the reptilian species that had ruled 3 galactic arms for 10,000 years found themselves facing an enemy unlike any they had ever known. The first wave of the attack targeted the HFY slipspace inhibitors, massive orbital stations that allowed faster-than-light communications between their worlds, and human strike craft destroyed them all within the first 15 minutes. The HFY suddenly found themselves blind and deaf, unable to coordinate their defenses or call for reinforcements, each system fighting alone against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere. The second wave was something that no species in the galaxy had ever seen before. Millions of autonomous kill drones that poured out of human carrier ships like swarms of angry insects. Cheap and expendable and absolutely relentless. These drones did not fear death because they were not alive. And they threw themselves against HFY defenses in numbers that overwhelmed every countermeasure, clearing the way for the third wave. The third wave was the crude fleet. And they came with weapons that humanity had kept hidden for 40 years. The Star Council had always wondered why human ships seemed so primitive compared to their rapid technological advancement in other areas. And now they had their answer, because humanity had been hiding its true military capabilities behind a mask of weakness. Human warships carried plasma cannons that could crack continental plates, missile systems that could overwhelm any point defense network, and armor that shrugged off weapons that would have destroyed ships 3 times their size. The HFY fleet commanders tried to organize a defense, but human tactics were unlike anything they had trained for. Brutal and direct and completely without concern for casualties on either side. Where other species fought with honor and tradition, humans fought to win, and they were willing to pay any price to achieve victory. The Battle of Cathanar Prime began 6 hours after the initial attack, when Admiral Chen Weilin's first expeditionary fleet arrived in the home system of the HFY Dominion. The planetary defense grid was the most powerful in the galaxy. 300 orbital fortresses and 2,000 defense satellites protecting the world. That had been the heart of HFY civilization for over 10,000 years. Admiral Chen studied the defenses for exactly 12 seconds before issuing her orders. All ships, attack pattern Omega, she commanded. Accept no surrender and give no quarter. The human fleet threw itself against the HFY defenses like a tidal wave crashing against a seawall. And while the wall was strong, the wave did not stop. Human assault ships punched through the defensive perimeter, using tactics that any other species would have considered suicidal. Absorbing tremendous damage to create openings for the ships behind them, Marines empowered armor launched themselves across the void between ships, boarding HFY stations and fighting through corridors filled with toxic atmosphere and vacuum and fire. They did not stop. They did not retreat, and they did not ask for quarter because they knew none would be given. The HFY fought with desperate courage, but they had never faced an enemy like this. Beings who seemed to have no fear of death and no limit to their anger. Ship after ship fell. Station after station was breached and captured. And the orbital defenses that had protected Cathan Prime for millennia were torn apart. Piece by piece, when the last orbital fortress fell silent, Admiral Chen ordered the ground assault to begin. Human dropships descended through the atmosphere of Cathan Prime like falling stars, carrying soldiers who had trained their entire lives for exactly this kind of war. And they landed in the heart of the HFY capital city. The street fighting lasted for 19 hours, block by block and building by building. As human soldiers pushed toward the center of HFY power, High Speaker Kethner watched from his command bunker as his world burned around him. And for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never experienced before: fear. When human soldiers breached the outer doors of his bunker, Kethner made a decision that he believed would save his life and the lives of his remaining followers. He activated the Universal Surrender Protocol, broadcasting his capitulation on all frequencies and ordering all HFY forces to lay down their weapons. Admiral Chun received a surrender transmission aboard Victory's Price, and her communications officer looked at her with something like hope in his eyes. "They're surrendering." "Admiral," he said, "High Speaker Kethner is asking for terms." The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke her voice was like ice. "Open a channel to the High Speaker," she ordered. Kethner's face appeared on the main display, his scales pale with fear and exhaustion, and he began to speak words of surrender and promises of reparations. Admiral Chun cut him off with a raised hand. "You attacked our colony without warning," she said. "You killed 17 million civilians, including children, without any attempt at negotiation or mercy. That was a mistake," Kethner said quickly. "We can discuss compensation. We can—" "New Valentia did not get the chance to surrender," Admiral Chun interrupted, and her voice was final. "Neither do you." She terminated the transmission and turned to her tactical officer. "Target the command bunker," she ordered. "Fire at will." The orbital bombardment that followed was precise and absolute, and High Speaker Kethner died alongside every member of his ruling council, every military commander who had ordered the attack on New Valencia, every official who had signed the documents authorizing the massacre. When the dust settled, human soldiers planted a flag in the ashes of what had been the heart of HFY power. The flag was plain black, with 17 million white stars sewn into the fabric, one for each human who had died on New Valentia. The HFY Dominion had ruled 3 galactic arms for 10,000 years. It had taken humanity less than 100 hours to destroy it completely across the galaxy. Other species watched in stunned silence as the news spread, and every single one of them asked themselves the same question: what had they awakened? The Star Council chamber on Axis Prime had never been so quiet, and when Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked through the great doors, every single delegate watched her with eyes full of fear. The chamber that had once buzzed with conversation and political maneuvering was silent as a tomb, and the representatives of over 200 species sat frozen in their seats as the human ambassador approached. The speaking platform Ambassador Lyrine of the Celestin Accord sat in their ancient seat at the head of the chamber, and for the first time in 3,000 years of galactic politics, the eldest of all species had nothing to say. Ambassador Vasquez reached the platform and stood there in silence for a long moment, looking out at the assembled delegates with an expression that revealed nothing of what she was feeling. Behind her, a holographic display activated, showing tactical maps and ship positions that made several delegates gasp in alarm. "As you can see," Vasquez began, her voice calm and clear, "our fleets have not returned to human space following the destruction of the HFY Dominion." The display showed human warships holding position at strategic points throughout Council space, sitting in systems that belonged to a dozen different species, close enough to strike but making no aggressive moves. "They will remain in position until we have concluded our business here today," Vasquez continued. "I trust this will encourage everyone to pay close attention to what I have to say." No one spoke and no one moved, and the ambassador allowed the silence to stretch until it became uncomfortable. 3 months ago, the HFY Dominion attacked our colony world of New Valentia without warning or provocation, killing 17 million of our citizens, she said. The Star Council did nothing. She paused, letting the accusation hang in the air. "But what concerns me today is not the Council's inaction," she continued. "It is the Council's active participation in our attack. The display behind her shifted to show intelligence reports, intercepted communications, financial records, and other evidence that human analysts had been collecting for months. The Morath Collective provided the Vethkai with detailed targeting data for New Valencia cities, Vasquez said. And the display highlighted the relevant evidence. Without this information, the Vethkai bombardment would have been far less effective. The Morath delegate, a thin insectoid being, began to rise from their seat in protest. But Vasquez cut them off with a look. "You will be silent," she said. And her voice left no room for argument. The Morath sat back down immediately, and their limbs trembled visibly. The Syndicate of Urim provided financial backing for the operation. Vasquez continued, "Funding the construction of the ships and weapons that were used to murder our people." The Urim delegate, a squat amphibian creature, did not even attempt to speak, simply staring at the evidence on the display with obvious terror. "And the Celestin Accord," Vasquez said, turning to face Ambassador Leering directly. "The oldest and most respected species in this chamber. The beings we trusted to maintain peace and justice among the stars." Leering met her gaze with ancient eyes that held something that might have been shame. The Celestin Accord knew of the planned attack 3 weeks before it happened, Vasquez said, and her voice was soft now, which somehow made it more frightening. "You knew? And you chose not to warn us." The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. And even species that had no involvement in the attack stared at Ambassador Leering with horror and disbelief. "We did not think," Leering began, but their voice failed them, and they fell silent. "You did not think we would survive," Vasquez finished for them. "You did not think we would fight back, and you did not think there would be consequences for allowing 17 million innocent people to die." She turned back to address the full chamber, and her expression was hard as stone. "You looked at humanity and saw a young species, new to the stars, easy to manipulate and easier to destroy," she said. "You thought you could use us as pawns in your ancient political games, sacrificing our lives to maintain your precious balance of power." Her voice rose, filling the chamber with cold fury. "You were wrong." She gestured at the tactical display behind her, at the human warships sitting in systems across Council space. "The Vethkai Dominion no longer exists," she said. "Their homeworld burns, their leaders are dead, and their military power has been erased from the galaxy." She paused, letting the weight of that statement sink in. "We could do the same to any species in this chamber," she continued. "We have the ships, we have the weapons, and we have the will to use them." Several delegates shifted nervously in their seats, and more than one began calculating whether their own species could survive a similar attack. "But we are not conquerors," Vasquez said, and something in her voice shifted, becoming almost sad. "We did not come to the stars to destroy. We came to explore and to build and to make friends among the other peoples of the galaxy." She shook her head slowly. "You made that very difficult." Ambassador Leering found their voice again, speaking carefully and slowly. "What do you want?" they asked. "What reparations? What concessions? What terms?" Vasquez looked at them for a long moment before answering. "We want acknowledgement," she said. "We want every species in this chamber to understand, truly understand, what happened here and why." She pointed at the Morath delegate. "You will pay reparations, the full cost of rebuilding New Valencia, plus compensation for every family that lost someone in the attack." She pointed at the Urim delegate. "Your current government will step down, replaced by leaders who understand the value of peaceful coexistence." She turned to face Ambassador Leering, "And the Celestin Accord will formally apologize, publicly acknowledging your failure to warn us and your complicity in the deaths of our people." Leering bowed their head, and when they spoke, their voice was heavy with an emotion that no one in the chamber had ever heard from them before. "It will be done," they said. "It will," Vasquez agreed. and then we will consider the matter closed." She stepped down from the platform and began walking toward the exit, but stopped halfway and turned back to address the chamber one final time. "Let the destruction of the Vethkai Dominion be a lesson," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the vast room. "Let it be the only lesson we ever have to teach." The great doors closed behind her, and the Star Council sat in absolute silence, each delegate contemplating the same terrible truth: humanity was not the weak and primitive species they had believed. Humanity was asleep. In the months that followed the destruction of the Vethkai Dominion, the galaxy slowly reshaped itself around a new reality, and every species learned to view humanity with very different eyes. The Marth Collective paid their reparations without complaint, transferring resources that would have bankrupted most civilizations, and their government made it absolutely clear that they desired nothing but friendship with Earth and her colonies. The Syndicate of Uran underwent a complete change in leadership, with the old ruling council quietly disappearing from public life and being replaced by a faction that seemed almost desperate to bail. Establish positive relations with humanity. Ambassador Lyrian of the Celestin Accord delivered the formal apology in the Great Chamber of the Star Council, speaking words that no Celestin had ever spoken in 3,000 years of galactic history, acknowledging their failure and their shame before all the assembled species. But it was what humanity did next that truly shocked the galaxy and changed everything that the other species thought they understood about the beings from Earth. 3 weeks after the end of the war, human aid ships began arriving at devastated Vethkai worlds, carrying food and medicine and construction equipment. And the survivors who watched these ships land could not understand what was happening. Human doctors set up medical centers in the ruins of Vethkai cities, treating wounded civilians and providing care to those who had been injured in the very attacks that humans themselves had launched. Human engineers began rebuilding infrastructure, restoring power and water and communications to populations that had expected to be left to die in the aftermath of their defeat. Human soldiers who had fought with such terrible fury just weeks before now stood guard over relief convoys, protecting Vethkai refugees from bandits and ensuring that aid reached those who needed it most. The Vethkai could not understand it, and neither could the rest of the galaxy. Ambassador Lyrian requested a private audience with Ambassador Vasquez, and the ancient Celestin came to the human embassy on Axis Prime with a single question burning in their mind. "I do not understand," Lyrian said, sitting across from Vasquez in a simple meeting room that had no decoration or ceremony. "You destroyed them completely. You burned their cities and killed their leaders. And now you rebuild what you destroyed." Vasquez nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "Yes," she said simply. "But why?" Lyrian pressed, and there was genuine confusion in their ancient voice. "You had every right to leave them in ruins, to let them suffer the consequences of their attack on your people. Yet instead you send aid and assistance. Would you have preferred that we continue killing?" Vasquez asked, and there was something almost amused in her tone. "No, of course not," Lyrian said quickly, "but neither would I have expected mercy. Not after what they did to your colony, not after 17 million dead." Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke her voice was soft and thoughtful. "Let me tell you something about humanity," she said. "Something that I think you and the rest of the council failed to understand." She leaned forward in her chair, her dark eyes meeting Lyrian's ancient gaze. "We are not a species that enjoys killing," she said. "We do not take pleasure in destruction or suffering. We do not celebrate the deaths of our enemies, and we do not seek conquest or domination." "Then why?" Lyrian asked. "Why such devastating force? Why such absolute destruction?" "Because they killed our children," Vasquez said simply. And there was something in her voice that made Lyrin feel very small and very young, despite their 3,000 years of life. 17 million people who were just living their lives, going to work and raising their families and dreaming about the future. And the Vethkai wiped them out without warning or remorse. She shook her head slowly. We could not let that stand. And we could not allow any species in this galaxy to believe that attacking humanity was something that could be done without consequences. So the destruction was a message, Lyrin said. Beginning to understand. Yes, Vasquez agreed. A message that we delivered as clearly and completely as we possibly could, so that no one would ever need to receive it again. And the aid? Lyrin asked. The rebuilding, the mercy you show now, Vasquez smiled. And it was the first genuine smile that Lyrin had seen from her since the war began. The war is over, she said. We won, and the lesson has been taught, and now there is no need for further punishment. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars that filled the night sky of Axis Prime. The Vethkai leadership made the decision to attack us, she said. They are dead, and justice has been served. But the ordinary people of the Vethkai worlds, the civilians who had no say in that decision, they should not continue to suffer for the crimes of their rulers. Lyrin rose and joined her at the window. Standing in silence for a moment before speaking, "You are a strange species," they said finally. "Capable of such terrible violence, yet also capable of such compassion. We are human," Vasquez said with a shrug. "We contain multitudes, as one of our poets once wrote. And we choose which part of ourselves to show based on how we are treated." She turned to face the Celestin directly. "Show us friendship, and we will be the most loyal allies you could ask for. We will trade with you and explore with you and celebrate with you and mourn with you." Her expression hardened slightly. "But attack us, threaten our families, kill our children, and you will see a very different side of humanity. A side that does not stop until the threat is eliminated completely." Lyrin nodded slowly. "Understanding at last. You choose to be kind," they said. "And that choice means something because you are equally capable of choosing otherwise." "Exactly," Vasquez said. "And now that the galaxy understands this, we would very much like to go back to being the friendly and curious newcomers who just want to explore the stars and make friends." She offered her hand to the Celestin, a human gesture of greeting and agreement. "Can we do that?" she asked. "Can we move forward together? As allies and partners in a galaxy that has learned a hard lesson." Ambassador Lyrin looked at the offered hand for a long moment, remembering the destruction of the Vethkai Dominion, remembering the 17 million dead of New Valencia, remembering all the mistakes that had led to this moment. Then they reached out and took the human's hand, a gesture that sealed a new understanding between their species. "I believe we can," Lyrin said quietly. Years later, a Marath historian would write the definitive account of the human-Vethkai War, and their conclusion would be studied in military academies and political schools across the galaxy for centuries to come. "We made the error of believing that human kindness was human weakness," the historian wrote. "We confused their patience for passivity, their optimism for naivety, their mercy for cowardice. And we did not understand the truth until it was far too late. Humans choose to be kind, and that choice requires strength. Because beings capable of such deliberate gentleness are equally capable of deliberate and absolute violence. When that gentleness is betrayed, they are not soft. They are simply, most of the time, gentle." And the Vethkai taught the galaxy the cost of mistaking the two. The Star Council never threatened humanity again, and in the centuries that followed, as humanity spread across the galaxy and built friendships with dozens of species, the story of New Valencia and its aftermath was passed down from generation to generation, a reminder to the galaxy of what humanity could do and a promise to humanity's children of what their ancestors had done to protect them. The black flag with 17 million stars was placed in a museum on Earth, where it served as a memorial to those who had been lost and a warning to those who might forget. And across the galaxy, whenever diplomats and leaders gathered to discuss matters of war and peace, someone would always remember the words that Ambassador Vasquez had spoken in the Great Chamber of the Star Council. Let it be the only lesson we ever have to teach. So far, it had been enough.